Welcome to the Builders Podcast, episode 37, Shoumo, Strategies for Small Businesses to Win Larger Clients. Before we dig into this episode, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe to this podcast or our YouTube channel if you haven't already. I truly appreciate your support. Today I'm joined again by Shoumo. As a business consultant and someone who mentors small businesses, he has a lot to say on this topic. And he has a lot of insights because he's worked for larger corporations. If you are a small business trying to work out how to attract or reel in some larger clients, this is your episode. Let's dive in. Hello, everybody. I am here again with Shoumo. He was in a previous episode, so this is his second episode with us, and it was a great one. Go back and listen to it if you haven't already. I don't remember which episode number it was, but Shoumo and I have known each other. We were introduced through a mutual friend, and we've known each other for a couple of years, but got reacquainted on LinkedIn not too long ago in the distant past. But I'll take a second here or a minute if you want to introduce yourself, Shoumo, and say hi.
Hi. So as you said, I'm Shoumo Ganguly. I work with small businesses through my business consulting firm, Oblivion Consulting. I also am a business counselor at the Small Business Development Center here in Middlesex County, New Jersey. I have several hats, but another one which is a bit relevant to our conversation today is the mentoring I do at Rutgers for startups. So, and I have the privilege of working with both startups and small businesses. And I have the background of having worked with corporates like with PwC as a consultant, with PwC, with IBM Business Consulting, where I was exposed to global brands like either Toyota or JP Morgan Chase or United Healthcare. So those type of organizations.
So you've had experience with larger companies and corporations and brands. So
right,
that's
now
good.
I work with a lot with the Main Street type of businesses.
Yeah. So that's great. Yeah, that's why this is such a valuable episode, because you're going to talk today about, this is the topic, we're going to talk about smaller businesses and how they can win larger clients, how they can approach, how they can talk to and work with companies that are much larger in scope, and there's more people involved with the decision process and all that stuff. So that's what we decided on a topic today. So you want to dig into that a little bit and your experience?
Sure. And the way I came up into this, I noticed that this is something which may need to be talked about. It goes back to a conversation I had about 3 years back and ties up with another conversation I had recently. So the recent conversation was with a firm that has salting contracts, like they salt the roads in the tri-state area during the winters when there's the snow.
I thought this was going to be an acronym for a minute, and I'm like, salt. You're going to have to explain that. But it's just literally salt.
Salt, right. Not the table salt variety, but like salt nevertheless.
Okay, yeah, got it.
And it's a single owner firm, and I was speaking with the lady who is their business manager, and they have contracts at state levels. Like they have contracts with Connecticut, they have contracts in New Jersey, they have a contract with even with the Port Authority. So, and she was telling me that Shoumo, when we get into these negotiations, there are up to 5 people from, say, Port Authority who are in that call, 5 people from 5 departments, like legal, purchasing, and whatnot. And they some of them are speaking, some of them are not speaking, but the process wouldn't go forward if all of them weren't engaged in the evaluation or in the negotiation or whatnot. So here is to me was an example of a firm that has buttoned up the need and how to of the selling to a large. It's a government contract at the end of the day, but a large firm. And in this case, the business owner isn't really engaged. It is this business manager who runs that part of the show. And as I was speaking with her, I was thinking back to the other conversation I mentioned. That was a real estate agent who had on the side a physical fitness program. And he was at that time trying to pitch to corporates who, an example would be like in the area where I live, say a Prudential who has a large office facility with a gym, and his fitness program was targeted towards the employees of the corporate organization and would be delivered at the on-premise gym. And his challenge was that he had a great first conversation with someone at that larger corporation, and then the whole thing fizzled out. Like the trail went totally cold, and he wasn't able to figure out how to revive it or why it went that way. So these were like the bookends of the example that I have in mind as we are getting into this conversation.
Yeah, and just to take a moment, I mean, these are things that, and I can relate to this. There's larger businesses that I've approached or talked with in my, almost 3 years now running this agency, where sometimes it's not always obvious who you're talking to. That's one of the first things you can always try to figure out who this person is and what their authority is. I've had situations where I'm talking to somebody that's actually just contracting with that company, and they're their tech person, but they're not even actually part of the company. The decision makers are somewhere else. I had a recent client I actually landed, but that was a situation where I was talking to the marketing person. That's where I got the referral. And then I ended up talking to the director of operations, but then they had to loop in the financial person to okay this whole thing. So I definitely have experience with those type of things. And sometimes I've had things fizzle out as well. And I'm sure behind the scenes, there's reasons for that, like you're going to get into here. So it's interesting.
At times you really can't help it. Like you might be pitching something which conflicts with a larger picture, and you are talking to a subset of that organization for whom this might be a great thing, but it may somehow inexplicably be not on track or on the same page as the larger organization, so it will fizzle away. And part of the thing is to get that input and not waste your time on things which would not work anyway. So there are some battles which can't be won, right? So so the whole thing boils down to, so what we are talking about then is in a large deal, there are multiple stakeholders, each with their own. The word agenda seems a bit disparaging, but their own responsibility and their own mandates. And if you are a smaller business who has not been exposed to the complexity or the DNA of those larger organizations, then you would be none the wiser.
And
right?
stakeholder, to be clear, if you could define that a little bit, I know what that is, but for
Right.
somebody that
So
has never heard that word before.
stakeholders are normally defined as people who are affected by the decision. But then there is also another way of if you plot it on two axes and create a grid or a matrix. Then on one axis you would put the degree of influence that they have, and on the other axis you would put the degree of impact
Okay.
or the amount of how impacted would they be by this project, this assignment, this work, this engagement.
That's an interesting way to visualize it. I like that. Yeah.
Right. And what I have also, as I have worked through, that's a fairly standard way of looking at it when you are looking at it from a Big Five consulting approach. But then what I have also realized is that the will or lack thereof of getting involved, like how much of we hear this phrase, the political capital when it comes to Congress, right? Like someone who, whether they are willing to use up that goodwill that they have or not. So
Right.
in addition to this impact and influence, you would also have a person who is very close to retirement in the corporate sector. Perhaps they wouldn't want to rock the boat, and they would want to find ways in which they could pass it off to someone else and not get involved. So they might be impacted, or that role might be impacted, and they might have a potential huge influence, but certain things in their personal situation, whether they are hoping for a transfer or something or the other, where they would choose not to get involved. But if you discount that, then those two other factors are fairly good factors to figure out whether they would be where are they placed on that grid. And then you would have to also figure out who is your champion, who is your go-to person in this whole structure.
Right.
Who would carry the battle internally and talk to all the stakeholders, rally them around, give you information which you can then act on. It's almost like an insider, but not really an insider. That person is bending rules.
Right. So, I mean, this is as I'm thinking about this and my interactions and stuff. That's the trick is figuring out, like I said, kind of having that single contact that you can become friendly with, that can help you. And do you directly ask that person who else is involved here, and how do you open that conversation? How do you find out who those people are? Who are the stakeholders that I need to worry about?
One of the ways of doing this is not asking that person the who question,
Okay.
but asking that question, so what is the process?
What is the process?
Which is a much more neutral way of approaching it.
I like
And
that.
once you map out what the process would be, obviously each process is not an automated process, but has people operating them. So then you get to the people behind those processes. And once you get a sense of, even if you don't know who is the people, but if you ask for what the role is, so you first map out the process and you map out the roles involved in that process. So it might be like I'll give you an example, like vendor registration, right? Vendor registration, if that is part of the process, you might have purchasing function as for someone involved. You would have legal as someone involved, and these are two different people, most likely with two different mandates, right? Legal is making sure that the the organization is protected from a legal perspective. There's no legal exposure. The purchasing person's risk management is, or one of the drivers might be vendor consolidation. So, is there someone else who is capable of doing the same thing, who is already enrolled as a vendor? So, when you are approaching them, and one of the processes is you are going through a vendor registration process, then these two people would most likely be involved. And and at times, these may not be very large organizations either. Like it could be, say, the local municipality that you are talking to. And those would have, so the risk tolerance of the organization is almost always a factor that plays in. And the risks are at times connected to the amount of funds in question, or oversight public money in question. So $100 of public money or $1,000 of public money could be equivalent to, say, 10K of private money.
Right. And I mean, and what you're providing too plays a big role in this, right? I mean, what problem are you solving for them that is valuable enough to now justify bringing you on board? And, you know, how, again, kind of thinking about the recent one I did just, that we started working with a couple months ago. And they're probably a larger company, but obviously they have multiple people. So you can already know, okay, they've got multiple people hired here, so they're a little larger. And then you got the CEO, the guy in charge up there. But one of the things that I noticed, I kind of lost my train of thought.
We'll get back to it.
I think that's the first time that's happened on a podcast. I've lost my train of thought.
But like to pick up where we were, and interrupt me if you suddenly have another idea or the same thing. So remember the last time you and I spoke on this podcast, you talked about the benefit and the value, and I had those 9 questions where so what we are talking about is in this is a bit more specific, a few of those components. So over there we had said first said that desirability, feasibility, viability, adaptability as the 4 things in a business. In desirability, we had said that the value proposition and the customer segmentation, which is the problem solution fit, and then comes the product market fit or the service market fit, and then comes
what I was gonna say now. Let me squeeze it in real quick.
Yeah.
But it ties into that. It's just figuring out how you're gonna, like, they were solving a big problem. I mean, they have a lot of revenue, and basically I'm the web design development guy, and they don't have somebody with a little higher level of tech knowledge and stuff to help them understand what's going on with their underlying frameworks and technology and all that stuff. And so their sites were going down for just randomly during promotions or whatever, or updating content. And they were having server issues, and they had nobody that was technical enough or wanted to take on that internally. So my value coming in helped a lot and helped sell. I'm sure my, what I was bringing to the table was going to help them, have a real impact on their revenue and the issues they're going to have. So I'm, helping them with speed. I'm helping them with making sure their site does not crash and stuff like that. So, and I think that was a little, in my case, it was a little bit easier of a sell, because I can come with those solutions. I have those solutions, baked into what I do. And and they're already happy.
So what I think the area that we are talking about today is, given that you had the solutions, most likely you had been speaking with them, or this could be a case study we could delve into. But when we are talking about a subject, at times I avoid case studies because they are very specific, and then they exclude a lot of other parameters which might be in play. So the as I was saying, that so the process and then mapping the role to the whole thing, that is that often is a way in which a lot of the smaller organizations don't really, if you have not, and it is also not just having worked in a larger organization, you need to have the exposure to a complex organization. Like size, at times I used to say, it's you could have a very large amoeba, but then it is still that unicellular organization. But then if you have on the extreme side, the most complex organization I have been in and lived that life was IBM, and the whole matrix structure, vertical, horizontal, diagonal, what have you. There's a country structure, there's a discipline structure, so there a profession structure. So there are so many structures that it is, and I remember that I was once the person who was shepherding the process of buying an ERP, in that case PeopleSoft, through the IBM process, and purchasing, legal, all of them, and we had already decided, we were halfway through the implementation of the software, and we were negotiating on the license with PeopleSoft India, and the amount of conversation and the scrutiny and everything which went on, and so you need to be prepared to spend an hour over just a sentence or a phrase. If someone considers it to be risky. Yeah, you had a question.
No, I was just going to say, like for me, so, and speaking to small businesses, right? Small businesses, if you've never been in a corporate structure, it's really hard to imagine. So, for me, my life, as an example, I worked mostly for small businesses when I was, I was in the restaurant business, restaurant and hospitality business, bartending, in my 20s, and I worked in an insurance agent for, I guess the insurance, there was a larger company, there was other layers to it, but for the most part, we were a small agency. And then working for myself, I've always been I always had small businesses. But then there was a point where there was a very, very specific company I worked with a few years ago that was more corporate. And you had Dolan there, you had Wilson, and they're coming from the very corporate world. So there was, when I worked with them for 3-4 years, and I was kind of, a lot of times I was observing things that I'd never seen actually implemented, or the structure, how they actually thought about things was different, and how they pulled people into something, into a decision, was a lot more structured, and it's different than just like a really agile, small, like we're going to do that. They were pretty good. They were pretty agile, but they were, at the same time, they were trying to, I think, introduce more corporate into it. It's interesting.
Into it. Right.
But even a lot of the ways they talk about things, and just the way they approach a problem and stuff, is different in a corporate environment than just your average small business. Yeah.
So there's what I would also like to talk about. Okay, so what could what could a small business then do, right? Like one is the appreciation part of it. And with this appreciation, where do you go? How do you go about tackling this thing? So part of it is internal, and part of it is the relationship aspect, or studying that larger corporation. The internal part of it is having a trail, or almost like, and I know this might come out like as a bad word, like you need to have a methodology, a method to doing things. One of my bosses once said, replicable processes produce defensible results. So, so you would, so when you are talking about recourses, or the larger organization holding back fees, or something like that, or suing you, so you need to have defense, and part of the defense is having replicable processes. So there, which means that you would have to have like almost like a standard operating procedure, which says that this is the process, and if you are submitting a proposal, include it as a appendix or an annexure to the even if you have like a one-page SOW, use it as a appendix, saying that this is the process that we will follow. And if the client and that often sort of pours a lot of like a oil over troubled waters as far as legal and purchasing is concerned, because they now have, the purchasing department has now de-risked itself and handed it over to the consuming organization of, say, either an HR or a line manager, who would then have the responsibility of following that process. And as long as both parties can show that this is the process that we have followed, no matter what the outcome, the specifics of the outcome is, everyone sort of, they might fight, but it would not get ugly. So that is one part of the thing, like documenting your processes and simplifying it, and being willing to share it with your prospect. The other part is to also,
and just before we go into the other part. So I mean, that's interesting, because you think like, I think that some of this is psychological. I think as a small business, you got to understand that you have some control in this as well, in the process and all that. That they're going to have their own processes, but it's not just them dictating to you, this is how we do things. But you also have to be confident enough to say, this is how I do things. And to understand that, because when I'm working with somebody, I'm flexible, but at the same time, this is kind of, I make sure I have everything documented and have my process in place. So I know that at any point, there's an issue that I have something to talk to. That this is the way we do things. This is at this point I need to get paid this, or at this point we do this. So
milestones, milestones,
right?
And almost like a table of contents of a document that you would be delivering, or like what your deliverables would be. So if it is a piece of software, then maybe along with the software, you would say that like, I will share test scripts with you so that you can go through user testing, or I will share program specs with you, or the system architecture diagram with you, or something of that sort, which correlates that code, which they are clearly in no position to accept or challenge or review or whatever. So they need a piece of paper or something which they can say, okay, we have some documentation, and that documentation could be a very rudimentary thing when it is. So for a website, it could be a wireframe diagram. It could be, and in your process, you would say that like, these are the steps that we need to take. And at the same time, like, and then we could get into the how to work out a methodology for a small business, and that would be a more involved discussion. So I don't want to get into too details.
The other thing too here is, and this is something that work for me, or that I include in my contracts or the documentation that I send along with it, is you have to, again, you have to understand, as a small business, you do have some negotiating power and the ability to say, this is the way I need this to happen, because otherwise, I got to protect myself too, probably more than they have to protect themselves, because there's a lot more at stake probably in a smaller company if something goes sideways. But one of the examples I was going to use is that I tried to put time frames in there into the contract, where if something hasn't moved in X number of months, 3 months,
right.
this needs to happen. Either we stop doing work, or we are going to get paid this, or whatever. Because I feel like another thing with larger companies is that things are slower.
They're not slower.
Or bottlenecks can happen and stuff. Yeah.
Correct. And so one of the things that we can talk about again at a later thing is that there's a RACI diagram. The who is responsible, who is accountable, who takes the decision, who is informed, who's consulted, and who is informed. So there are a lot of things that you can, and these are very simple tools when you know that there are multiple people involved.
Yeah.
So this is what a business can do internally. And when it comes to, and also the other thing which I wanted to also bring up is show or figure out a way to show the full team as against the principle behind the owner only. So a lot of larger businesses get nervous when they see it's a solopreneur and there isn't a large team. Like very recently, my local township, I submitted an SOW, draft SOW to the township, and in it there was this sentence that the township, the SID, the Special Improvement District Committee, is hiring Shoumo Ganguly of Obligent Consulting. When the attorney who looked at it, he scratched out Shoumo Ganguly. So the SID is hiring Obligent Consulting. It is not just it's not dependent on a person, but they're hiring the entity, which has a way more legal recourse and protection than just the person. So there are so that's a very subtle for a solopreneur. That's a very subtle distinction, but that distinction exists. Right.
Yeah, I mean, some of this is perception too. I would imagine, like just purely perception. Like when I do the same thing. Like in early days, probably not so much because I was more freelancer because I would outsource some things here and there. But today, I don't try to speak of myself. Just this is Matt Levenhagen's thing. But Unified Web Design, and I talk and I try to actually purposely say my team will do this. My developer is going to help with this, or I'm going to bring this guy. We're going to team up on this. So I make it obvious we have a team. So that's one of the. I think that does help because I've had obviously clients that ask that. Like they actually will be upfront and say, "Are you doing this alone, or are you?" And I'm like, So no.
And I think if anyone who's listening to this podcast, they want consultation, they can come to you. And between the two of us, we could also help them set up such a situation or how to navigate this.
Right.
In the little time that we have left, I think I'll also touch on the something which I also refer to, or a lot of times that is the context of which drives this conversation. Like often people come, the small businesses in the SBDC come to me, and we are talking about like the LinkedIn strategy, for example, and whatever we just now discussed is very much applicable, or that knowledge can be carried through your social media tools or platforms. Like through that platform, if once you know who your prospect is or who your target audience is, you research those businesses as against the individuals, and then look for those titles or roles within that organization. You get to those people on LinkedIn, you establish connections, you look at what they are doing, and you try to map their pains, gains, and chores, like what they want, what they need to do, jobs to be done, and try to establish that trail and connect with them, tag them, speak to them from that perspective, so that you can then use that information while not directly trying to go behind that organization's process, but at the end of the day, if everyone realizes that you are partnering with them and then supporting their process, then they would be open to be speaking with you. And LinkedIn is a great place where you can establish that one-on-one connection, which you otherwise wouldn't have been able to do. But then LinkedIn doesn't tell you who is the right person. And that is where, when we started off, we said that, like, you look at the role, look at the process, look at the roles. And then while you are working some stuff out on one end, you work out more, you build up relationships with the others. And in order to, just one thing before I let you jump in.
No.
And another thing which you need to do is, you also need to shore up that perception that you are working as a team. So in a LinkedIn environment, in a B2B platform, that in the LinkedIn environment, that's your business page. And who are the employees that come up when someone goes to your business page? If it is just you, then you need to be able to figure out how to solve that issue. The other tool which I am like nowadays, which I also influence or push or suggest that small business owners take seriously, is Alignable, where you can establish that local partnerships or even national, regional partnerships. And there, as a small medium enterprise, you would find more providers or professionals of your size and caliber, and you look at them as partnering opportunities, and look at LinkedIn or a tool like that as the way to reach into the larger corporates. So how to use, like, your process, the tools all together to pitch to the larger.
I need to actually get on there yet. So I know you've been talking about it, Alignable, for a while.
Right.
And you're
Alignable is doing like a short plug for them. They're investing heavily in some of the which they are moving from just being individual profiles to communities, and then they are building in groups. They are categorizing some groups as alignable alliances, and those are good things which are happening over there. And if you are a small business, then you absolutely need to check it out to see whether it may not work for you. I'm not saying that it works for everyone, but in some cases it would. Like, I haven't even seen B2C organizations get a lot out of that environment, because when they are on, say, Alignable, they are looking at, say, building up a distributor network or something like that, as against trying to directly influence prospects.
Right. Yeah, so that's interesting. Yeah, we probably should wrap it up here pretty soon. You and I could talk like all day. We could be for 5 hours.
Right.
No, the only thing I was going to interject before, I think, to one of your points, finding the correct person to get in front of, or to prospect to, or to get involved with, or to engage with on social media. It's interesting because there's like when I think about engaging with certain companies, agencies in my case, or whatever, I'm looking at, generally speaking, who's the CEO, who's the founder, who's the guy in charge. But as you scale up and your target larger and larger organizations, it's not necessarily like a lot of my clients. I am dealing directly. This recent one's an exception. I'm actually dealing with director of operations, but I have had some interactions with the CEO. He's pinged me, but a lot of them, I just the founder of the agency or the owner or whatever. But that's not always the case with the larger corporations. You have to go after somebody else or try to get somebody else's attention in that company. That makes going to be more involved with that decision, that specific thing you're doing.
Correct.
Yeah.
It all depends on the process and the role. It's not so much as, and that's where the decision makers are tied to.
Yeah.
Good.
That's why you got to understand. You got to understand your business and what you're providing and who you need to talk to. All right. Well, great conversation. Like I said, we could talk for hours, but we won't. We'll just break this up into like the next 5 years, different small snippets. But it was great having you on again. I appreciate your time and taking the time to be on the podcast. I think this is another valuable
for
episode. And
inviting me back to this, and we can, as you said, that there are lots of stuff that we can talk about, and
oh yeah,
most likely.
Yeah, that's the total challenge. It's like we start going into these little like. Oh, we could talk about that for an hour. Let's not go there. let's save that for another future one. All right. Well, you take care. Okay.
And
all right.
And
thanks.
Thanks to everyone. Bye.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
That's all for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed that. Again, please subscribe if you haven't already and give us a thumbs up if we deserve it. If you want to comment on this podcast or provide me with requests on topics for future episodes, please find your way to thebuilders.fm. You can contact me there or add a comment under these show notes. Now a word from our sponsor, Unified Web Design. That's my agency. We build custom websites, features, we maintain websites, we work with agencies to fulfill their web design and development needs, and more. If you're interested in our services or looking for an agency to work with as a partner to build awesome sites for your clients, feel free to reach out to me at unifiedwebdesign.com. There's a handy contact me link at the top. Fill out that form and it will open a ticket, and that ticket will find its way to me. Thanks for joining me today. We'll see you next time.